So the technique I'm going to show you now is using really soft slabs. So this here is a slab that I just finished rolling out off of the slab roller. And so I'm going to take my metal rib and I'm going to compress my clay particles. And this is something that I do every time I roll out a piece of slab. And so one thing that this helps with is it makes your clay stronger because you're compressing your clay particles. And then it also has the added benefit of revealing any air bubbles. So if you didn't wedge your clay well, this will highlight any air bubbles that you have. And it looks like I did a better than normal job because I'm not seeing any air bubbles. Almost always when I roll up, I see a tiny one. So you can just poke it and then squish it out. Not a big deal. Little tiny air bubbles you can get away with. They're not going to explode, but big ones you can't. And so if you have a bigger air bubble, just pop it and squish it out. And so now I've got a clay slab that is fully compressed and it is that much more strong. And so I'm going to create an organic shape. And again, I also like to always be really efficient with my slabs so that I use as much of it as possible. Wedging is not my favorite, and so I want to make sure that I am using as much of the slab as possible so that I'm not crumpling up a lot of it and wasting a lot of it and then making myself wedge unnecessarily. So again, any clay that I'm not going to use, I dip it in water and set it aside so that I don't have to reclaim that. I will have to re-wedge that, but at least I don't have to start from scratch. So I'm cutting a slab larger than really what I need. And I'm going to use my wear board so that I don't have to handle this clay and distort it more than necessary. And I still have a really great slab here that I'm going to save. So when you're slab constructing, you always need to score and slip everything. And so I have this really great scoring tool that I love to use. And so if you don't have one of these, a scoring tool, you can also use a fork and it helps speed up your process. Obviously it doesn't do as good of a job as this. What I do sometimes in my studio is I have a metal fork and I've used the Dremel tool to sharpen my tines, and it makes a really good scoring tool. And that's pretty cheap. And so you always want to score in 2 different directions. And that's a good score job. And this is my compressed side, so I actually really want to use it on this outside edge. And probably I should have used my compressed side the other way, facing down. But it's not that big of a deal. So again, you want to score. So when you're slab constructing, you score and slip both sides of the clay every time. And you always go in 2 directions, at least. So to speed up the process, I have a piping bag, a frosting applicator, and so I just have this filled with slip. And so if I wanted to, I could use extra slip and only slip one side, but I'm going to go ahead for demonstration purpose and slip both sides. So the way a frosting bag works, if you've never decorated a cake with one of these before, you don't hold it like this. You hold it from the top, and as you use it, you continue to slide it. You continue to turn it. And so I'm going to slip this side also. Then I have a pipe cleaner on mine, so when I set it down, it doesn't spill out. Also, I like to keep my pipe cleaner in water like this to keep the tip moist. So this is the trick. Not losing your slip when you do this. So obviously it would have been a lot easier just to have doubled up on the slip, on the slab part, use plenty of slip so I didn't have to worry about losing my slip off of this. And now I'm just trying to make sure that it's lining up on the bottom here, and it looks pretty good. So then what I want to do is I want to cut this at a die. So I always like to attach my clay at a diagonal like this whenever possible. When you try to attach your clay like this, it works fine, but oftentimes you're kind of pushing it together and you'll end up thinning out this area right here just by pushing it together. But when you work with the diagonal, like I have here, it's a lot easier to connect the two, and you'll see. And so, like usual, you always score and slip both sides. Basically what I want to see is I want to see the slip squeeze out. So on the inside here and on the outside. So my slip is squeezing out nicely. So it tells me I have a good amount of slip. And so now in order to attach these, all I have to do is push this down, and I have good contact between the two. So rather than going like this, when you have this diagonal attachment, all you have to do is score and slip and push it down, and it creates good contact. Okay, so this is extra that I don't want to have to replay. And this is a slab that I'm going to save for later. So now I've got all this really great clay here that's nicely rehydrated. So I'm going to use this for my welding coils, but before I do that, I need to wedge it. If I don't wedge this up, I'm going to have a lot of trapped air, and I'm going to create air bubbles in my welding coils, which could be a problem. And so I'm just going to take a minute to wedge it out so I don't have any air bubbles, so it won't explode. Now, since this clay is in really good shape, it's all wedged, I'm going to put it in this plastic bag and set it aside so that it's not perpetually drying out on me. So first thing I need to do is score again. And so now I'm just using my cleanup tool to score with because it does the job a lot better, and it goes around these corners nicely, better than my scoring tool. You can also use a needle tool to score with. And when you're scoring, again, you're going to go in two different directions. And just this act of scoring alone really kind of does help stitch the two slabs together. So this also needs scored. And then the inside. So both sides. When you slab construct, you always want to score and slip both sides and add a welding coil in both sides. So you'll notice I have two different sizes of coils here. I've got a thick one and a thin one. And so oftentimes I like to dip my coil in water just to make it a little bit more moist than the clay itself that I am working with. And so I like to use the thicker coil on the inside because this coil is not going to be seen, and it's really going to do the bulk of the work for me. Also, so this coil I left nice and round, but when I'm dealing with sort of flat surfaces, I tend to like to flatten out my coil. And so this one's going to go right up in here. And so the reason, again, I like my coil a little bit more moist is so that when I'm pushing this coil into my clay wall, my coil more readily distorts and blends in rather than distorting my clay walls that I created. So it's kind of hard to get a serrated ribbon here to blend with. So that's when I use one of my wood modeling tools. You can use your finger too if that works for you. And then I'm just going to blend this in so that my welding coil is welding these two different slabs together. So I want to make sure that that coil spans the gap. I didn't add new slip in there because I had a lot of slip, but I don't have a ton of slip on this outside edge, so I'm going to add some slip. So always score and slip everything. Sometimes if you have extra slip, you can skip the slip. But that needed more slip. So again, just dip my coil in water. And so now I'm using a smaller coil on this outside edge. And I'm actually going to flatten it too, since I'm working with a flat wall. And I'm using a smaller coil because I'll end up scraping away a large portion of this coil because I want my clay wall to be nice and clean and precise. I don't want this big coil lump there. But it's important that I score and slip and add this so that it helps bond the two together. And so now I'm going to use my serrated rib to blend with. And so I'm really just trying to compress my clay and push it into those score lines. So those score lines that I created were really important. It's important that they're nice and deep because a lot of this coil, like I said, is going to get scraped away. And what gets left to help hold it together are the ones that are stuck in that scoring line. And so you'll notice my rib not really scraping anything away. I'm just really compressing my clay particles and compressing that clay into those score lines. So when you're slab constructing, your score lines are much more important. So don't be stingy with your score lines. And it goes all the way over the top. You can also use one of your soft ribs to blend with. I tend to like to dip my tools in water to lubricate them first so they'll glide across the surface more easily. And so that you have a nice blending of that coil, really joining those two walls together. I have some water in here that I just want to get rid of because now I want my clay piece to set up before I work on it. But before I set it aside for a minute, I'm going to take some time. So again, I'm not scraping. Some of the clay and slip does come off, but really I'm compressing this clay into that edge so that it's really helping holding it together. And so obviously some does come off in the process, but I'm doing a little bit of cleanup work now while it's easy to do. So there's a little extra clay there. And then later, once this firms up to leather hard, then I'll scrape it more and clean it up. So the natural inclination is to be impatient and to go ahead and just add this on. And when I do this, this is a pretty small slab piece that I'm making. It's slumping in ever so slightly. If it was a lot larger, it's going to slump a whole lot more. And so really, you want to just be patient, set this aside, and then set this whole thing aside, let this become leather hard, and then attach it so that it doesn't slump in on you. So we will come back to this.